Welcome, everyone. Really good to see you. It's a pleasure to be able to tell you that this is the 400th webinar or seminar that the Centre for Global Higher Education has run since it started in late 2015. And most of that large number of 400 consists of webinars, which we began in 2020, just after the pandemic kicked off, about a month later, as a way of keeping everyone together, which was, I think, been successful. Once again, we've got a very good set of registrations for today's webinar, which will be with Dr. Shekhar Tokas from Ambedkar University in Delhi. I'll introduce our speaker in a moment, but let me take you through the housekeeping slides first. Now, as you will know, if you've been on the webinar before, we record the webinar and we post it on the CG site and through that on our YouTube channel. And we're finding that people are using the webinars even more on the YouTube channel than they're using them on the day they're delivered. Now, during the webinar, we advise you to stay muted if you can. And you don't have to have your camera on either. But we, of course, want you to put both your microphone and your camera on if you can when you come into the Q&A section of the webinar. Nothing sadder than, as we all know, than in a Zoom meeting to see someone talking with great vigor when you can't hear what they're saying. So don't forget to turn on if you're coming into the discussion. During the webinar, we advise you to use Speaker View in the top right-hand corner there, because then you can see who is speaking at any given time. Now, to enter the discussion part of the webinar, which starts about halfway through, use the chat mechanism. Post your comment or your question in the chat. And from the chat, I will then select you into the main Q&A discussion. Unless you tell us that you're interested in saying something and it's relevant to the webinar, we can't select you in. It's a good idea to come in early into the chat, because sometimes if you post your request to enter the Q&A late in the process, like 5 or 10 minutes before the end, you miss out because the speaking list is full by that stage. So come in early. Come in, and if you want, come in more than once. That's acceptable too, although we'll usually give priority to people who've not yet spoken. Now, when you are called in, I'll send you a little note in the chat saying you're the next question. You, of course, as I said before, turn on your mic, turn on your camera if that's possible, and then you tell us who you are and where you're from, and then make your question or your statement. So I'll stop screen sharing at this point. We'll go back to human faces. Let me introduce our speaker. Dr. Shekhar Tokas is assistant professor in the School of Global Affairs and Deputy Dean, International Affairs at Ambedkar University in Delhi. At this point, I'm happy to hand over to you, Shekhar, and the screen is yours.
So thank you so much, Professor Simon, for introducing me. And just a sec. So a very good afternoon to you all in UK, and also good evening to all the audience in Indian subcontinent. So today's topic is basically is a result of the research that I did in my PhD doctoral work during 2015 to 2017. It also includes some preliminary results from ICSSR project, that is Indian Council for Social Science Research project, that is specifically on motivations and mobility experiences of international students. So the research is a combination of a literature review that I have done recently, and then there is sort of bibliometric analysis also that I have done. Plus, there are results on primary survey that was done in 2016 and 15. So the presentation is divided into 4 sections. I would start with introducing a broader introduction about the internationalization model in the global north and what is India's approach to internationalization. This is followed by a second section where I bring in the evidence on the dominance of global north. Third section will deal with more evidence from India, which is basically evidence from primary survey that I conducted several years ago. And finally, what could be possible pathways for destination India. So let me start. As you can see, the present landscape of internationalization of higher education is dominated by global north, which has a primary aim of recruiting international students for revenue generation. This is more of a market-driven model. As a result, we see that there are sort of corridors or linkages are created, which I call as global north-south linkages, where we see that there is flow of international students from global south to global north. Also, we see a lot of focus on reputation, ranking, and branding of institutions. So point number 2, point number 3, that is global north-south linkages and reputation and branding both feeds into the larger aim of revenue generation by global north. This has resulted in a more, I would argue, a more exclusive and elitist nature of internationalization that is happening in global north, that is catering to only a small proportion of students out of the total number of students. If we compare this with the India's approach to internationalization, the primary focus has been on IAH, that is internationalization at home. And again, the prominent feature within that, or prominent objective within that, is how do we make India a top destination country for foreign students? Unlike a more market-driven revenue generation model that is there in global north, I see, so there is no mention of revenue generation within national education policy or UGC guidelines on internationalization. There is no specific mention of revenue generation as their objective. Or in fact, revenue generation has not even been used even a single time in these 2 documents. So how do we look at this? So what I have to say is that rather than being a more market-driven model, this is a model which primarily wants to focus on India's soft power. It is more of a post-colonial model that we see after many colonial countries which were under British rule, they got independence. So it was more of a cooperation model. I also call this as a diplomacy intermediate model, which is rather than being a market-driven model. But we also see that there are exceptions to this. When we see in Gujarat, we have option of gift cities that is created by the present government, which is more of a market-driven model where foreign universities in top 1,000 are invited so that they can come and set up their campuses and they can take the money in form of profit back to their home country also. If we compare the Indian approach in terms of global north-south linkages, obviously India is saying that we want foreign countries to establish, foreign universities to establish their campuses in India, and also Indian campuses abroad. So largely, but still the focus is similar to what is there in global north, having more of international universities in India. Then there is also focus on improving global rankings. This is visible when we see that there is synchronization of Indian ranking. There is an attempt to synchronize Indian ranking with the world QS and the higher education rankings. Another important aspect that I wanted to highlight is, in contrast to a very exclusive and elitist approach that is there in global north, national education policy says that they want, when they talk about enhancing international competencies or international exposure, they want to do it for all faculty and students rather than for a specific small proportion of students. Interestingly, I see this as more of a decolonial approach where they want to promote the global mindset for students and faculty, but with a strong pride in Indian ethos. So it is a combination of Indian ethos and having best of what is there around the world. Okay, in terms of uh, dominance of global north, so what I have done is to look at the dominance of global north. What I have done is I have done a bibliometric analysis of based on a Scopus database of 4,500 articles. And so the keywords basically that I used was internationalization of higher education, different aspects of higher education, international student mobility. These are the combination of these keywords I have used. So as you can see, most of the relevant sources that are there with respect to internationalization of higher education, they are primarily clustered around few journals, as you can see on the left of your screen: Journal of Studies in International Education, Globalization, Society, and Economy. Then there is another important journal, Compare Studies in Higher Education and Higher Education Policy. In terms of most cited countries, as you can see, uh, again, the dominance is clear when we see clusters around United States, United Kingdom, and there are some exceptions in terms of studies done at Nigeria, Malta, and other countries. In terms of most global citations, I think most of us are aware of some of the authors that you see on the screen. So we have Philip Altbeck, who is situated in Boston College in US. Then we have D.K. Dreadroff, who is again, I think she is in Duke University. She also does significant work on internationalization of higher education. Then we have Jane Knight, who is there in the University of Toronto. We are well aware of Simon Marginson, who has work on higher education. So again, we see a dominance of authors from global north, I would say. In terms of most relevant authors, we see again Jane Knight, Philip Altbeck and Jane Knight, and Simon again is there. You can see few clusters here. Similarly, in terms of most impactful authors, I am looking at the H index of several authors. You can see we have M. Yemin Nee, who is basically an author from Israel, University of Tel Aviv. Then we have Jane Knight. Aryang also works on internationalization of higher education. So this is exception to some of the prominent work that are done in global north. So we have Aryang, who specialize on internationalization in China. Similarly, so in terms of universities also we can see, so University of Toronto, Monash, Deacon's, Tel Aviv is in Israel. So dominance of most of the global north universities, with exceptions from China, Hong Kong, and Israel. In terms of co-authorship of organizations, we can see that this is based on a temporal thing also, that we look at the last decade data. You see that again there is a dominance of global north universities. University of Hull in UK, University of Oxford is there, Monash is there, Melbourne is there. So more of greenish and yellowish dots emphasize that more collaboration is happening actually. But you can see that most of the universities are again based in global north, who are working in the area of internationalization of higher education. What about co-authorship countries? We see again dominance of United States is there, United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, with new clusters that are developing in form of China, Malaysia, South Africa. So some exceptions are there, but mostly you can see clusters are around US, Germany, UK, Australia. So what is happening in India? So as I said, that the focus of internationalization of higher education in India has been about how do we internationalize at home rather than just sending students out of India, or rather than being a source country. So as you can see, national education policy and UGC guidelines specifically focus on objectives like whether we can provide low cost quality education other than STEM related, providing international relevant curriculum in STEM related courses. Can we provide low cost quality education in more courses that are more relevant to Indian context? Then there is emphasis on student support also. Although we have created international affairs division, there is scope of scholarships also. We still have to see effectiveness of the international affairs divisions that are created, and we also know that many of the scholarships that are given by Government of India are usually empty. There are no takers for it. Then the approach is also of internationalizing from the point of view of research and teaching, opening up campuses, Indian campuses abroad, or foreign universities opening their campuses in India, and whether we can also have some twinning and joint programs. Looking at the Scopus database, specifically looking at articles which specify on or talks about internationalization of higher education in India, I could find only 8 research articles, and that too specifically focusing on magnitude and direction of international student and some of the policy initiatives taken by Government of India. Similar is the case for AISHE data, that is All India Survey in Higher Education, which only talks about magnitude and direction of international students. So what is happening in India? So as you can see, the number of international students over the last decade have been increasing in a sustained way, but still this is, represents less than 1% of the total flow of international students. Where does the student comes from? So the students that are coming to India are basically from South Asian countries, as you can see, Nepal, Bangladesh, Afghanistan. And if you add Central Asian countries like Iran and Iraq to this, and also African continent to this, so number goes up by 95%. So is it that the students that are coming to India are basically coming from developing countries only? So during my PhD, what I did was I filed more than 100 RTIs, Right to Information. So there's an act in India called RTI Act, Right to Information Act. So I filed more than 100 RTIs in Indian embassies, Indian missions, and consulates abroad, and I got data for around 26 countries. So briefly, I just want to focus that there is a lot of underreporting that is happening. If you look at the rows highlighted in red, you see, so on the top table is the AISHE data, that is the government data, and the below table is the RTI data. That is the data that I got through filing applications. So you can see the share of North America, Europe, and Australasia in total students, according to government data, is hovering around 3 to 5%. If you compare this with, if I replace data for 12 countries that I got for developed nations from North America, Europe, and Australasia, we see figure goes up to around 16 to 18% of international students being from developed countries. So this is more of a macro picture that I looked at. What about the micro picture in terms of motivations and experiences of international students? So theoretically, I have adopted human capital approach or human capital theory. So the prime application of human capital theory has two mobility of international students or foreign education. Basically focuses on it as an approach where international students invest in foreign education for formal education. They acquire discipline-specific skills and knowledge, and obviously this is for monetary gains. In my study, I have tried to explore that part of investment in education, which is less explored. So I am calling this as investment by foreign students in informal education. This investment is done for generic skills. So you may call these as social and emotional skills. And this ultimately leads to non-monetary gains. Please note that these are not exclusive categories. There is obviously an overlap of these motivations. So when we invest in formal education, there would be monetary gains and there would be non-monetary gains also. If I invest in informal education, there would be monetary gains and there would be non-monetary gains also. So what does data from the field talks about motivations of international students? So as you can see, so what I've done is, what I did was, I looked at the top preferences of international students in terms of motivations, and I wanted to see whether they had economic or non-economic motivations. So as you can see, 51% of the students so 46 students out of 90. So this is a sample based in Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi University, and Jamia Millia Islamia. So I took 30 sample from all these universities, total sample of 90. Out of the 90, 46 students said that they had economic motivations, focusing primarily on quality education and international experience, which can lead to economic gains. What I want to focus more here is on when we look at non-economic motivations of international students, we get to know that students are interested in not only getting discipline-specific knowledge, they are also interested in exploring uh, destination country wherever they are going. They are interested in exploring the social cultural aspects of that society. So out of 90, 21 students said that they wanted to explore, they wanted to get personal experience and develop understanding of the host society. Interestingly, I had 8 students, you can look at the number 2 within non-economic motivations, who said that their motivations were more spiritual, religious, and philosophical in nature. And all these 8 students at DU are basically monks from countries like Indonesia and other South Asian countries. Another important non-economic motivation was, there were again 5 students from JNU and 3 students from Jamia who were looking for. So these were the students from politically unstable countries, and they were actually looking for asylum or a sort of permanent residency. So in a way, I'm calling these as forced migrant students who basically were involved in specific courses, but they ultimately wanted asylum. And then we had 5 students from 3 from DU and 2 from Jamia, who were they were seeking for prestige and popularity at home society. These were basically from South Asian countries like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and were involved in performing arts courses like Indian classical music and dance. And then 2 students from JNU, who were basically called casual students, who were not looking for any credited courses, but they were there as casual students. So how do we look at, let's say, how do we relate economic motivations and preferred mode of learning? As you can see, around 78% or 88%, 80% students basically preferred, who had economic motivations, preferred formal education mode of learning. If we compare this with the non-economic non-economic motivation and the preferred mode of learning, we see 52% of the students who had non-economic motivations, they preferred informal learning. You may call this experiential or out of class learning. Importantly, if we combine the percentage for students opting for both formal and informal education, we see number goes up to 82%, that is 52 plus 30%. So what are the major trends? We see students having economic motivations basically come from developing countries. They are in, when I say popular, I mean courses like management, engineering, and other courses. So they also prefer formal learning. The socioeconomic background in terms of parents' occupation or income is also low. In terms of international educational experiences, they are doing well or similar to what non-economic students having non-economic motivations had. International exposure of parents other than educational exposure was lower in case of students having economic motivations. If we compare this with students having non-economic motivations, they were from developed countries, mostly on short-term and traditional courses. They preferred informal learning. They had better socioeconomic background. Their peers also had better or higher international educational exposure and other international exposure also. So region and economic motivations, we see students coming from Asia and Africa have economic motivations. 85, this is true for 85% students. Similarly, uh, students from Europe, North America, Australia, East Asia, they had non-economic the preference for non-economic motivations. What about when we talk about experiences of, let's say, students having non-economic motivations, I wanted, so this is a very typical answer saying that I wanted to explore social cultural aspects of a destination country. I was more interested into what is it that they gain. So in when we talk about experiences, I'm looking at what is it that they actually gain. So these are the extractions from narratives that I have tried to take help of Daniel Goleman's concept of social and emotional intelligence. So these are the themes that I've extracted from the narratives of international students having non-economic motivations. Uh, these are segregated into 6 themes. So on the left, these are the skills and knowledge which are more intrapersonal in nature. On the right side of the screen, these are the skills, social and emotional skills, which are more interpersonal in nature. So this is what I proposed, and I tried to conceptualize or augment the human capital framework, where I'm saying that international students' motivations, whether economic or non-economic motivations, are influenced by social environment. What do I mean by social environment? Social environment basically means I'm looking at stock of economic capital and stock of human capital. Please keep in mind that human capital here, so human capital includes personal and social capital, unlike what we do in sociology. So those having economic motivations, they usually tend to invest in formal education for expected economic gains. Those having non-economic motivations, they invest in personal experiences and social capital, leading to non-economic gains. Obviously, I'm also saying that these are not exclusive categories. There would be overlap between economic and non-economic gains. So, what are the possible pathways for India? So, I look at this from the point of what exists today in India and what is there that we can adopt or create. So, first, pathway for destination India is we have to have clarity of objective and structure. So we have to decide what should be our approach. So right now, what we see is there is too much dependence on, or you may call it coerced or copied international, when we say that we are trying to become world class as defined by the West. That is having more number of students. There is a lot of focus on the quantitative aspect, having more number of students, more number of faculties, more number of agreements with international universities. So what can we adopt, or what can we do as India? So India can be guided by use of contextual lenses, in particular decolonization, regionalization, South-South cooperation. We may also look at this from the point of, let's say, can we have an Indian way of internationalizing higher education? Similarly, there could be multilateral collaborations can be there. BRICS, ASEAN, SAARC, Indo-African Forum can be created. But importantly, we should focus on work permits. That I feel, if we want to have multilateral collaborations, we must have work permits for students coming from developing countries. Similarly, or clear, so we need to have clearly articulated institutional commitment, policy, and structure is needed. Uh, Again, so then the next step should be what type of indicators we should have when we want to internationalize Indian higher education. What should be the indicators of internationalization, and can we have a assessment metrics about internationalization? So we know that what exists is a lot of focus on, as I said, number of students, faculty, institutional agreements. Uh, Although quantitative indicators are important, somehow they can establish accountability requirements, but they do not capture the key intangible performances of students, faculty, researchers. How do you measure the level of intercultural competence that is created or acquired by a student in a classroom? That is difficult. So can we have a assessment matrix which is in combination of quantitative and qualitative aspects of internationalization? So once we decide about indicators and an assessment matrix, what we should do is we should conduct a pan-India survey. Thankfully, along with the professor from OP Jindal University, Professor Maushmi Mukherjee, we will be conducting a pan-India survey. When I say pan-India survey, this will be for 13 to 15 states. So as you can see, at present, there is no survey, but we are in the process of having a pan-India survey on motivations and mobility experiences of international students. Pathway destination for India, number 4. So what we see today is there is no specific center that focuses on internationalization of higher education. We have centers on school education, we have centers on higher education, but specifically there is no center which focuses on internationalization of higher education. So there is a need to establish not only international affairs division, but Center for International Education, which could become the linchpin for universities. Pathway destination number 5, there is a utmost importance of having a good governance, I would say good governance model. So we do have international affairs divisions which are created recently, but there is no separate resource for these institutions. So like if I'm working in international affairs division as deputy dean or international student advisor, I also have other teaching responsibility and other administrative responsibility. So that is not, so being a deputy dean or international affairs division international advisor, that is not my sole responsibility. So we have to focus on the resource, whether human or financial resource. And these international affairs division must act as student support centers, which is an essential aspect of giving good experiences to international students, which is missing at the present. Finally, we as a country are focusing more on STEM related courses. We are also focusing more on long-term degree programs, and as we know that most of the students that come to India are from developing countries. So what I want to offer or say is that we should also focus on or create strategies that focus on accumulation of social, emotional skills and knowledge. We can call this as SSHI, that is Social Science Humanities, which is more Indian in nature or has more Indian context to it. Again, so India being, South Asia or Southeast Asia being cusp of Indian civilization, can we also, somehow can we somehow tap into this Asian identity or global South identity? So this can help in collaborations. Again, stemming from my research, as I said, that there is a need to bring into total scheme of things the informal nature of learning or experiential learning should be offered to students specifically from developed countries. Then can we also have focused on short-term programs? Can we offer more of short-term programs or courses with two specific focuses to have a better pitch of, let's say, Indianization of international higher education? So this could be new age learning with contextual adaptation. That is combination of, let's say, AI and Ayurveda, AI and astronomy, AI and Vedic mathematics, Sanskrit studies, computational grammar. And we can also pitch for, let's say, something like Indian art for living through yoga, spirituality, healing, cultural spaces, architectural forms, folklore pedagogies, and ecological paintings. So that would be all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Shekhar. There's a lot there, and it's good to see the systematic development of a strategy, and the way you've laid it out for us makes it very accessible. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions and invite all participants to come in at this point and put their comments and questions in the chat. But let me get the ball rolling. Internationalization of higher education 10 years ago around the world was probably everywhere seen as a good idea. And there was a view, I think, that it was the key to improving quality. Perhaps the most important single thing you could do to change your situation was to internationalize. Often that was understood in terms of research collaboration. In many countries, not all countries, it was understood in terms of students coming in, and as India is now talking. And in most countries too, well, perhaps everywhere, it was understood in terms of people going out, whether students or faculty or both, and coming back, which of course didn't always happen. But all these different forms of internationalization seem to be under the general heading of internationalization is a good thing. And that view was not only held in higher education, but I think was quite widely shared in government, in ministries of education and elsewhere, and science ministries and so on, where the emphasis was on developing international partnerships and so on, and the preparedness of governments all over the world to fund internationalization was striking. Now, the situation has somewhat shifted. A lot of people would now see interdisciplinarity rather than internationalization as maybe the key move to make in relation to improving quality and also relevance impact of higher education and research. I wouldn't say that the idea of internationalization as a quality driver has been abandoned. It hasn't, but it's not quite as hegemonic as it was 10 years ago. And certainly there are more obstacles to the movement of people through immigration ministries for temporary educational and research purposes than there were. And, you know, in general, in the policy space in a lot of countries, a move towards nativism, which probably doesn't work very well for people mobility, even if it's only temporary for the purposes of education and research. So the climate, in other words, not quite as favourable. But my impression from you and from others is that, and the NEP itself, is that India is placing more emphasis on internationalisation of higher education than it was. Is that the case? And why do you think that is the case?
So first thing I want to point out is that if you look at the national education policy, there are only 2 paragraphs on internationalization of higher education. So policy is of 66 pages, but there are only 2 paragraphs on internationalization of higher education. But there is a subsequent document produced by UGC, University Grants Commission, which specifically is titled as UGC Guidelines for Internationalization of Higher Education. And though on paper, I would say that all the indicators, whether quantitative or qualitative, that we look at from the perspective of internationalization and all the modes of internationalization, whether let's say it is in terms of student mobility, whether it is in terms of how do we improve the curriculum, teaching, learning, research-based internationalization, what are its impacts with respect to societal impact. These are there in the UGC guidelines on internationalization of higher education. But looking at it from the practical point of view, like I am Deputy Dean and International Affairs, International Student Advisor also, we see, although we have created International Affairs divisions, centers, there is a lot to be done. So for example, let me tell you, there is no, if you look at NAFSA survey and other surveys that are done, they specifically focus on whether you have have specific amount of resource for international offices in terms of human resource and financial resource. There is no as such resource that is allotted to these international affairs division. So faculty which is already overburdened with teaching and other research and other administrative responsibility, they are not able to give that much time. Secondly, I feel there is a lot of need with respect to making people understand that internationalization is not only about having more agreements. Internationalization is not about having more students. Internationalization is not about having more of international faculties, which I feel many of the private universities are also doing now. Prominent private universities are doing. So what is needed is, I feel, telling faculty and students and leadership also, because there is a lot of pressure from the leadership that we should have more of collaboration. We should have more of collaboration. Why we are not having more of international students? there is a need to make them understand that whatever number of students we have to focus on what is it that they are learning inside the classroom in terms of their intercultural learning. We have to focus on this. Whether if you look at, let's say, if you look at many of the students in our classrooms from many Asian and African countries, we will see, easily see that they are sort of there is a sort of ghetto. Our domestic students also needs to know what do we mean by internationalization, what is their responsibility towards a foreign student who is sitting in their classroom. So I think in practice, on paper, in policy, on paper, there is everything, but in practice, there is a lot that we need to do. As I said, initially, India wanted to be more of a boosting its soft power. Nowhere it mentions that they want to generate revenue. Some people may call it as a branding strategy for India, where they are saying that foreign universities, top 500 or top 1,000 universities can come to India, and they also want to have more of international campuses. So at present, I see this as a more of a not revenue based, but there is a lot that is need to be done at the practice level or at the institutional practice level.
Well, you mentioned soft power, and I mean that's probably not something that drives us on the ground, is it? We don't say we're working with our international colleagues or with international students because we want to increase our nation's soft power, but it is a motive for governments. I mean, associated with that, I think there's the question of the regional role of Indian higher education institutions, and the South Asian, I suppose, broadly Indic culture region, which the whole of South Asia is. Do you think that Indian institutions and the nation as a whole have a special role in the region? And let me put the question, I won't even open the question of Pakistan, but let's talk about Bangladesh, where you've got Bengali culture on both sides of the border, and a lot in common in that direct sense. Is there scope, do you think, for India to play a significant role in educating students coming out of Bangladesh in the longer term, and Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, Maldives, the rest of South Asia?
So unfortunately, although the prominent amount of the larger proportion of students that are coming to India are from South Asian region only, we have not been able to harness the relationship that we have with the other SAARC countries. I feel that there is this what should I call this? So if you look at the global North countries, they are, there also there is a linkage of global North best countries and then global South countries. We as a developing country are also trying to focus more on the developed countries rather than the South Asian countries, which I feel that it is not an option that we should focus on either or, but I feel that we should focus on both. So we also need to look at how does the students of these countries, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, how they look at Indian education. And one prominent thing that can be done, which can be very effective, is giving work permit to students. Students coming from South Asia and Africa, they are barely surviving in India, I would say. And if you look at the governance issues, many times the ICCR's fellowship, Indian Council for Cultural Relationship Policy Fellowship, that they get, these are also delayed for 6 months to 1 year. So can we also have work permit for these students? I think this will tremendously increase the number of international students. If you look at UK, if you look at Australia, I do not call that as a student visa. I call that as work visa, work permit visa. If you remove the work permit visa, if UK or Australia, they remove the work permit visa for international students, you will see considerable fall in number of international students going to these countries. So there are several aspects. I think we as a country also need to look at, we have to forge better relationship with educational institutions in these countries. How does Indian educational institutions or universities look at the universities in these countries? That is there. So how does students in these countries look at Indian education system? These are the aspects I think we have to focus on. As such, there is no specific focus by government of India on forging better ties in terms of education with these countries.
I know. But I think that there is an ambition to build international student numbers, and that they have to come from somewhere. And Indonesia is another, Middle East and South Asia are the most likely providers, I would think. I mean, in the longer term, you would think that as Indian higher education institutions become stronger and their reputation grows, then they'll become more of a magnet. And I guess the fact of the Indian economy growing at 5 or 6% a year, if that keeps going for 20 more years, I mean, on the best of possible scenarios in terms of growth rate, then there'll be so many job opportunities, in India. So then the question of being able to work becomes one of the drivers of the student movement as well. As you said, that already happens with the international education countries, which have large numbers. The UK is about to experiment in the opposite direction by making it harder for dependents to come in with students, and we think already that's causing a fall in numbers. So that the ease of work and the ease of bringing families with you when you're working after you graduate, all that comes into play here. Now, there's been some wonderful positive comments about your excellent presentation, Shekhar. And I would hope that the people who are making positive comments would come into the chat with some questions and some thoughts. And I'd be happy to bring them onto camera.
Can I share one more thing?
There is someone waiting, though. Let me bring you in then if you want to come in. No? Okay. Soman Chattopadhyay is waiting. Soman, I haven't given you a warning. Are you ready? Good.
Yeah.
Give us your question.
Sir, good evening.
Very good evening, Shekhar. I'm really happy to see you here. Professor Marginson, I think he did PhD at our center where I teach now, Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies, and you have added quite substantial amount of research, because I did attend your PhD presentation at the center quite some time ago, and you have done substantial work. I've got three questions, Shekhar. First question is my speculation. I mean, given low ranking of the Indian universities, global ranking, and the thrust in the national education policy on Indian knowledge system, yoga and other things, Ayurveda and all those things that you mentioned, do you think that the non-economic motivation would assume more importance in the coming days, rather as compared to the economic motivation? The second is a sort of clarification. You gave us the sample, and you had JNU, DU, and JMI, Jamia Millia Islamia. I was thinking about University of Pune. Now, is your sample, or was your sample random? And does it truly represent the students who come to India to study? In that case, if you could include University of Pune, for example, the results would have been different. This is what I think. And the third question is that, you talked about synchronization of Indian ranking system, NIRF with QS and THE. I personally think that the parameters in NIRF are very different from QS and THE. In fact, the government of India proposed our own national ranking system because the global ranking parameters do not address some of the basic questions that we are struggling with, like access and equity. Thank you.
Yes. So let me try to answer some of these. First is, so the sample that I have taken is more purposive in nature, because I was more interested in knowing why students from developed countries come to India. So in a way, I already had this thing in mind where I wanted to I wanted to focus on students who are not specifically looking at formal education, quality education, and thereby going to the market for better job prospects. But I was looking for students who are not, who would not be looking for a formal sort of education. So this was there in my mind. So that's why when we look at these three universities, I have included their periphery also. So when I say JNU, I included students from JNU periphery also. DU periphery, Jamia periphery. Because in periphery, we find many students who are not part of the university. And so as I knew that many students in DU periphery were actually monks, although they were students of DU. Similarly, many students in DU and JNU periphery were from politically unstable countries. So this is not a random sampling. I agree with you. If I would have taken sample from University of Pune, where students are, I feel that they are more into professional courses, then they would have more economic sort of motivations. So in that case, there would be prominence of economic motivations. But I I was more interested in looking at why students have non-economic motivations. I think today this makes more relevance also if we look at the situation of Ukraine, and then we see that there is a new concept that is coming up. We are calling it as forced migrant students. So I was talking about this in my PhD in 2016-17, that there are students who are looking for asylum or permanent residence in India. So so I wanted to look at the students who were not there for formal education but having non-economic motivations. So secondly, when I'm talking about synchronization of ranking, uh, the point that I'm trying to make is there is no synchronization on part of the government of India. Only document says, the UGC guideline says that we should have synchronization between Indian rankings and the international rankings. So I'm not saying that there is synchronization, but document says institutions should work towards that, and I feel MHRD or other education related ministries will have to work towards that. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the questions and thanks for the answer. Our next question, in fact, we've got two closely related questions. One from Susanna Jayadeva, and then Bhavika Sikar is going to ask a question, but Susanna is first.
Thanks so much, Simon, and thanks so much, Shekhar, for the really amazing presentation. I learned a lot, but it was great. So my question is kind of similar to Bhavika's question, which is below. And so the question is that you spoke about the sort of pathways for the future, and that universities need to incorporate informal learning into teaching that fosters Indian and Asian identity, including through programs on things like Ayurveda, Vedic mathematics, Sanskrit studies, courses on the Indian art of living through yoga, and so on. And I was wondering whether there could be a risk of Indian identity and culture becoming Hindu identity and culture. And I think that given the political climate in India, I was wondering whether you feel that this is quite a big risk, and also how you think we might address this risk and how we can ensure that we keep this kind of cultural learning opportunities more inclusive and multicultural. So I'd be interested in your thoughts. Thank you.
So thank you so much for your question. See, I personally believe that when we talk about Indian knowledge system, we are specific. So some of the examples I gave, because those are some of the traditional areas of academic or research where India has historically, have done some significant work. So there should not be as such. Obviously, there are political angles to it, I understand. But I personally feel that when we talk about Indian knowledge system, we are also talking about what is it as Indian education system academia, researchers can provide, other than, let's say, these, if you feel these are more Hindu focused programs or Indian knowledge system. I'm also trying to include, as I said, that there could be a combination of AI with Indian knowledge system. So Indian knowledge system could be as diverse as the courses that I mentioned. It could be about folklore pedagogies, which could include all religious pedagogies. So that is something I think we as academics and researchers have to work on. It is there on the paper, but we as researchers and academia, we have to work on this.
Apologies for the dead spot. I was in the middle of sorting the advice to the webinar about next time. Bhavika, can you come in, please?
Sure. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Tokas, for a very informative presentation. My questions dovetail with Susanna's questions. So in the past, there have been instances where the government has centered certain knowledges and perspectives and decentered others. And I was wondering what the Modi government might do to make conditions necessary for freedom of speech, which I believe are very important for many international students when they're thinking of a destination for where to study. And my second question is related to this. It's about whether any existing research exists looking at how Hindutva populism might impact international students. I know there's a lot of research in the US about how the Trump government has impacted international students, but it seems we don't really understand neo-nationalist movements in the global South. So is there any research on this?
So again, I think I don't have much to offer on this because I specifically do not specialize on this also. So as I said to the previous person who asked the question, I still feel that Indian knowledge system is more than what is there. And in fact, if a specific form of government, you may call it a Congress-based or right-wing Modi-based government. But I specifically feel we as researchers and academia has a lot to contribute to this. We as Indians have to define what do we mean by Indian knowledge system. Indian knowledge system, I personally feel it is not only about let's say Ayurveda or astronomy and other things, but it is also about how as individuals from a specific community, this community could be Indian, you may call it Indian community comprising of different people from different religions, different castes. We have to define what is Indian knowledge system. I think there is still a lot of scope about how do we define Indian knowledge system. So in my previous organization, when I was working in a private university, there is a lot of focus on how do we bring in the literature that is bring in literature. Let's say if we look at a subject like microeconomics or macroeconomics, how do we bring in literature related to literature of Indian authors regarding micro and macroeconomics? How do we bring in the case studies relating to Indian context? How do we bring in more of examples relating to Indian context? I think these are also part of Indian knowledge system, and all communities, caste, creed, belonging to any section in India, they can bring in their own contextual knowledge. That I call as Indian knowledge system. Thank you.
And thank you both for those challenging questions. I mean, to summarize, Shekhar, what do you think are the main obstacles facing Indian institutions in moving forward with the internationalization agenda, and how can those obstacles be overcome?
Yeah, first thing is that we have to understand what is it that students who are coming to India want. What is their motivation and what is it that they experience in India? I was trying to refer to in between example from international students from Africa. So in my PhD, when I interviewed the student who basically belonged to a specific country, and I don't want to name the country, specific country in Africa, he basically said that they had image of India as a developed country. they thought that when they will come to India, they are going to gain a lot of academic, research-based and other informal experiential learning also. But it is, when I listened to him, there was a sorry state in the sense that he was, very upset with what was being provided in India. And I'm talking about Delhi University. And there is a lot of expectation from the classroom, but there is a lot of expectation from out of class also. Whether your teachers, whether your peers are giving you time, whether they are gelling with you. These are some of the important things that are there. So as I said, we need to have pan-India survey about whether, so first challenge is, we don't have any pan-India survey. We don't know what are the motivations, but we don't know what are the experiences of international students. Second important issue is governance issue or student support issue. All the existing students that are there in India, they face some sort of governance issue. There is no specific support system that students could have. So, and last 1 year, personally, I feel that there is a lot needs to be done. Rather than just creating international affairs division, there has to be specific human resource that is to be assigned to student support systems, and specific amount of money should be dedicated for international affairs division. This is primarily what I feel should be done, so that there is a lot of research on internationalization. From there, we will have more challenges, I feel.
Well, thanks very much, Shekhar. I mean, I think this is a very good webinar, and one where, because of the quality of your presentation and the detail on the slides, will be watched a lot, I think, in YouTube in future. Let me emphasize to everyone here that we would really like to do more CG Global webinars on Indian higher education and South Asia more generally, but certainly India, the major country in the region. It's very, very important that the world knows more about higher education and knowledge in India, and particularly this relationship between indigenous and national and regional cultural linguistic elements on one hand, and the global higher education environment on the other. India, emerging country, really important country, tremendously rich and deep culturally, and really important contributor already to the global conversation in all kinds of ways. But, it's really good, I think, for all of us if we can find out more about the inside of higher education in India. So please come forward, send me an email with the proposals for further webinars. I'm thinking we might develop a webinar series on Indian higher education fairly early in 2024. But I really would welcome people who are watching and listening now coming forward with proposals for individual webinars. You can do them singly, or you can do them in pairs. Sometimes a panel works, although I think 1 or 2 people really is the best for this 1-hour format. So you've seen the notification, folks, about the next webinar on the problems facing global science, the strain in the publishing system, which those of us who engage in journal work are very, very aware of. That's next Tuesday. We've got 4 speakers, so we're going to test the limits of the 1-hour format with 4 speakers. Now, we've also got an important event at University of Oxford, where I'm based. Riyad Shahjahan from Michigan State University, who's very well known for his scholarship in relation to global higher education, globalization, global whiteness, and his critique of nation-centered approaches to policy and thinking about higher education. He will be giving a seminar, a face-to-face seminar, which we will live stream and which you'll be able to access online on Monday at 12 o'clock UK time. So look at the CG website and you will see there the links to both on-site registration and the live stream registration to hear Riyad Shahjahan. That's a really important event for us. So thanks very much again, Shekhar, and congratulations on your excellent work today. And to everyone who's still watching, it's bye for now, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thank you.